A science story, huh?
These NYU scientists,
I
it
felt
felt
really
right.
But I was so
And I just thought,
happy.
well,
I had figured it out
It was that golden moment.
because science was on my side.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Story Clutter, where true, personal stories about science help us to discover how weird and wonderful it is to exist in this world and be a human. I'm your host, Misha Gajewski, and today's episode is a special episode produced in partnership with the Institute for Neuroscience, Neurotechnology, and Society at Georgia Tech, a new interdisciplinary research institute at Georgia Tech. The event, Wired Lives, where these stories were recorded, reflected INNS's mission to connect cutting-edge science with the lived experiences of those it serves. It was supported by BlackRock Neurotech, a leader in brain-computer interfaces, and Medtronic, a pioneer in deep brain stimulation for neurological conditions. By centering personal stories, Wired Lives captured the spirit of INNS, advancing neurotechnology that is not only innovative, but also ethical, inclusive, and grounded in the real lives of people it aims to help. Our first story is from a retired director of pharmacy asset protection and a recipient of deep brain stimulation surgery, Brandan Mehaffie. Brandan's story was recorded earlier this year at Interface Neuro Conference at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. Here's Brandan.
So it's 2013, and in my opinion, life has gone pretty doggone good for me. I graduated pharmacy school. I married my high school sweetheart. I had two beautiful daughters who were both healthy and happy. My professional career was going great. I was about 2 years into my dream job as director of pharmacy asset protection, as you heard. And in my personal life, I had taken up competitive endurance sports, and I was very into cycling and kind of matriculated a bit into age group competitive triathlon. So it was a beautiful, crisp fall day and on the weekend, and like most weekends around that time of year, I was doing an event. So my brother-in-law, who's about 3 years younger than me, was my training partner and buddy, so he was up from Raleigh, and we were competing in the Hershey 10K. And unfortunately, he whooped me by about 7 minutes, which was not normal. Trust me, not normal. After we finished and I took some significant ribbing from him, I said to him, buddy, my whole right side of my body was cramping up during it. I said, if I didn't know any better, I felt like I was dragging the whole left side of my body. So we chalked it up to, bad training or whatever, and just moved on. So over the course of the next couple weeks, I didn't feel myself. I was used to getting up at 4:30 in the morning and doing multiple workouts for 2 hours, and I couldn't even drag myself out of bed. I was racked with pain, and something just wasn't right. So I decided to take myself to my primary care physician, who I had known for about 10 years, and he was a CrossFit gym rat as well. And I said, Mike, I have no idea what's going on with my body, but something is not right. So we did some blood work. I went back, and the blood work didn't show anything, and I was, a little disappointed that I wasn't getting an answer, but he put his hand on my shoulder and said, don't worry, we're going to get through this together. And we did just that, and this started about a 2-year process of me going through every conceivable kind of specialist that there was. I started with sleep study, I went to endocrine, I went to cardiology. You name it, I went through it. So it took about 2 years, and one of the last appointments on my healthcare journey was neurology. So my wife said to me, do you want me to go to this appointment? I said, well, given the way that all the other appointments have gone and I haven't gotten any answers, they've been pretty quick. I'm like, why don't you come? We'll do that. We'll get it over with, and we'll go grab lunch before you go back to work and I go back to work. So went in to see the neurologist, and pretty much immediately when she started doing her battery of exams, I could tell that there was something just not right with my left side of my body. But, being young and invincible, I was thinking pinched nerve, something, pop some Advil, I'll be fine. So as she rolls back on her little stool and gets in the drawer, she comes forward with a white and red folder that says Parkinson's Foundation. And I'm thinking to myself, who's that for? And so she starts talking to me and says, there's no definitive diagnosis for Parkinson's disease, but I've seen it before and I'm fairly certain that you have it. And it just wasn't exactly registering with me at the time of what she was saying until I looked over at my wife's face, which was now covered in tears. And pretty much at that point, the rest of the appointment was like listening to Charlie Brown's Teacher. And I kind of zoned out. So after we left the appointment, we got to the car, and I'm trying to reassure my wife that everything's going to be okay. And in reality, had no idea what my future would hold. But as with any instance in life, you soldier on and you move on. So I went back to work, she went back to work, and I continued with my career and my journey with Parkinson's. So flash forward about 6 years. I'm now 6 years into my journey with Parkinson's, and at this point, I really can't hide my symptoms from my coworkers or practically anybody. I'm not sure how much everybody in the crowd knows, but tremors are pretty significant with Parkinson's. Unfortunately, I dealt with a lot of pain in my shoulders and muscle cramping, random muscle cramping called dystonias. And at that point in my career, I wasn't driving. I hadn't driven for about 8 months. I stopped being able to travel, especially by myself. I was having to take naps throughout the day. The gold standard medication that they give you for Parkinson's is called Sinemet, and unfortunately, Sinemet works great, but the longer you have Parkinson's, the more you have to take to elicit the same control of your symptoms. And of course, with that, the more you take, the more side effects you get. So I was taking other medications for dyskinesias, and I just was in a bad way. So unfortunately, I was at a crossroads in my life at 47 years old of trying to figure out, do I continue with the status quo and watch my career dwindle into nothing and watch, my life with my family and my kids not being able to go on hikes or family vacations and things of that nature. So I was very fortunate that my neurologist recommended and that I check into a procedure called deep brain stimulation, which if you're unfamiliar with it, and I apologize for the super smart people in the audience, but you can think of it as like a pacemaker for your brain. So essentially they put a device in your chest, leads or wires run up into the leads that are in your brain, and they send an electric current there to help offset some of the physical symptoms of Parkinson's. Well, let me tell you, thinking about somebody messing with your brain and going through brain surgery is not something I came upon lightly. There were many nights that I sat with my wife and we talked about the pros and cons. I did my research on the devices and the surgeons, and I went to seminars and things of that nature. And the final thing that made me decide to do it was listening to my wife saying, "Live your best life now." So that summer of 22, I underwent deep brain stimulation surgery, and it was an absolute success. It changed my life in ways that I can't even tell you for the better. The downside was that right around the same time, now that I could feel what was normal versus Parkinson's pain, I came to find out that my right shoulder that I had hurt in high school was now in need of full reconstruction, including bicep tendon replacement. And so I was recovering from brain surgery, and now I was going to be down for a year, that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't drive. I couldn't lift more than 5 pounds for a year. So also at that time, I kind of had a heart-to-heart with my employer after my neurologist talked to me and said that she thought that the stress that my career put on me was what exacerbated my symptoms and made things worse much quicker than they normally would have. So at that point, I had a heart-to-heart with my employer, and we decided to mutually part ways in January of that year. So being retired at 47 years old, not the coolest thing in the world. It was pretty fun the first couple weeks, you know. But when I tell you that I hit the end of the internet and pretty much every streaming platform known to man, brother, I've seen it. Unfortunately, I also found quite a few bottoms of Dorito bags along the way as well. So I was sitting around with my wife going to work, all my friends going to work, my kids going to school, and there I am. And my job was a pretty high-paced job, so I went from being a nerd with 2 iPhones going 1,000 miles an hour to 0 in the blink of an eye. And that just didn't sit with me too well, because with nobody around, nothing to do, nowhere to go, nowhere to drive, all I could do was be in my own head. And it was very difficult, you know, thinking about the long-term, you know, how I felt with Parkinson's and what my long-term prognosis and the fact that it's not going to get better, it's only going to get worse, really was a mind job for me. And the longer things went on, the deeper and darker my depression got. And I can honestly tell you it was probably one of the darkest periods of my life. I considered taking my own life a few times, and it was very, very difficult. I had tried multiple counselors. I went to grief counselors. I went to multiple therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, with pretty much little help. Around the same time that I finally got cleared for my shoulder, I finally found a therapist that I connected with named Bill. And so I got cleared, and I jumped right into trying to do what I did before. So I started trying to exercise, trying to run, trying to swim, and it was torture. And torture in the sense that when you're a competitive athlete and you know what you were capable of before, and you're trying to do those same things again, and you're seeing the result is nowhere near what you used to be, again, pretty tough mind job and pretty torturous. So sitting in a session with Bill, I was explaining to myself and complaining about who I was. Bill had a genius idea. He said, well, why do you have to do what you've done before? Why don't you try a sport or some kind of athletic something that you've never done before? So this was an epiphany for me. So before COVID, I had heard about a program called Rock Steady Boxing for Parkinson's patients. So it's basically you do all the drills that you do in boxing, but obviously we're not hitting each other. So I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump in. I mean, when I'm in, I'm in. And so I blew the dust off my gym bag, got some boxing gloves, and I was ready to go. So I found a program at the Jewish Community Center not too far from my home, and I was off on a Wednesday for my first Rock Steady Boxing program. So as I walked into the gymnasium, I look around and I see about 18 to 20, 60 to 80-year-olds. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? And then to make matters worse, the first day that I was there, they wouldn't let me participate because I had to get a waiver signed by my neurologist saying I was healthy enough to participate. So there I am, and I'm stuck in the room. They had already introduced me to everybody, and so I couldn't back out and leave. So I got stuck sitting at the table with all the caretakers and spouses of the people participating. And I'm like, oh, God, get me out of here. But a funny thing happened. I sat there, and they were all incredibly nice. They were all incredibly welcoming. They were all incredibly interested in my story and what was going on. And they talked to me about what their spouses and their partners were going through. And I got a really good feeling from it. So I decided to go back. And then I went back again, and I went back again. And I kept going back. And it became like a family for me. It was more than just physical exercise. It was a support group, like a secret support group that I didn't even know I was getting into. It was a safe place for me where I could have Parkinson's and be normal and not have to talk about it. So I was gone for about a half a year. And the JCC moved into a new facility, a nicer facility, and they decided with the success of the Rock Steady boxing that they had been having that they were going to add some more programming to it so that we had 5-a-day Parkinson's programming. And the director of the program was talking to us about what she was going to add. And she started talking to the group about a program called Pedaling for Parkinson's, or the Davis Finney Foundation. Well, I thought I won the lottery, I'm like, you're talking about indoor cycling, right? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, I used to do triathlon, I used to cycle. I'm like, oh, that sounds so great. Well, then she dropped the bombshell on me. She goes, how'd you like to be one of the cycling instructors? Well, that was all the spark that I needed. I've been there ever since religiously. I teach every Tuesday and Thursday, and I get to give something back to a group that has meant the absolute world to me in a place that means the absolute world to me. And a strange thing happened along the way. I've made a lot of really good lifelong friends that I'm invested in personally, and they're invested in me personally. And yes, they're 60, 80 years old. But they're, in my opinion, friends for life, and I'm eternally grateful for it. So that's my story. Thank you.
That was Brandan, and I have to say, I'm genuinely in awe of his courage, optimism, and ability to adapt in the face of such a life-changing diagnosis. Receiving news like that at such a young age would be overwhelming for anyone. But Brandan has met the challenge with grace and incredible strength. If you'd like to learn more about him, head over to our website, storyclatter.org. Being a storyteller on stage is just one way to make Story Clatter happen, but if sharing your story in front of an audience isn't your thing, maybe becoming a Story Clatter donor is more up your alley. Right now, the voices of scientists and science communicators need to be heard more than ever. At Story Clatter, we believe that personal stories can cut through the noise, connecting people to the human side of science, building trust, and making complex issues real. But we can't do this work without you. Story Clatter donors play an essential role in our ability to bring you this podcast, share these stories, and foster conversations that matter. If you believe in the power of science storytelling, please donate to the Story Clatter at storyclatter.org/donate. The most popular level is $10 a month, and you can make your tax-deductible donation at storyclatter.org/donate. But really, any level makes a difference, and we're so grateful to everyone who supports Story Clatter. Our next story comes from founder and president of the BCI Pioneers Coalition and the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium president, Ian Burkhart. His story was also recorded at the Interface Neuro Conference at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, and I'm so grateful Ian shared his story with us, and I hope you find it as moving and inspiring as I did. Here's Ian.
I had just finished my freshman year of college. I was 19 years old at the time, and I was going on a summer vacation to start the summer break with a few of my friends and my girlfriend at the time and her family. And we were also excited to drive from where I lived in Columbus, Ohio to North Carolina and, got to the ocean and swimming in the waves. And I remember just, the freedom of what I felt like of, not really having any responsibilities right then and just enjoying myself. And I dove into a wave so that way it wouldn't push me back too far. But what I didn't realize is that I was diving into a sandbar. And so I was diving into the shallow end of the ocean. And so I immediately hit the bottom and I knew something was terribly wrong. There was this sense of stillness that overcame me where I couldn't move any part of my body. And I was just trying not to panic because I always remembered from, in any tragic situation or emergency situation, don't panic, don't waste any energy that you didn't need to. But in that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong because I couldn't get out of the water. And it was, I was really thankful that one of my friends realized something was going on and was able to pull me out of the water and flag down medical care. And then I remember, the beach lifeguards took me to the fire department. I was laying on a stretcher and I could feel the wind from the helicopter blades being pushed down upon me as I was loaded onto the medical ambulance to be life flighted to the nearest hospital. And that's kind of the last memory that I have for about a day and a half. But then we fast forward to me waking up in the hospital and a doctor telling me that you've broken your neck, you're paralyzed, you'll be a quadriplegic, and you'll never walk again, you'll never be able to feed yourself again. All these nevers that you'll never be able to do again. And to me, that was a big challenge because, like I mentioned, I was 19. I had just had this first taste of really freedom and independence in my life, of where I was living on my own in college and, really doing what I wanted to do. And I felt like I had the whole rest of my life ahead of me. And this was just such a abrupt stop to that. And I remember looking at the doctor and just feeling like, how can you tell me that when you don't know me? You've just met me. And you don't know what I can do, what I can't do. But you're telling me that I'm not going to be able to do all these things in my life that are very simple things that I took for granted my whole life. And so that really motivated me to want to prove the doctors wrong and to, prove everyone in my life that I was still strong and still could do whatever I wanted to do. And so I went through traditional physical therapy and rehabilitation, and I was able to regain some function where I was able to feed myself with adaptive utensils. I was able to drive a power wheelchair and scratch an itch on my forehead, but I still needed help getting in and out of bed, going to the bathroom, and doing a lot of just daily activities that, once again, I took for granted in my life. And that was a real challenge from where I was at before. And, then I got home from the rehabilitation hospital and I felt like I was watching my life pass me by as if I was in a movie. I remember, seeing my friends go out and continue doing and living their lives and, doing things that I thought I would still be a part of. And instead I was, sitting at home watching it. I, would try to do anything I could to help reach for some independence. And so there were plenty of days where, my parents would be gone, my sister would be at school, and I would be home for a few hours in between from when a caregiver left in the morning to when someone got home, and I would just try something. And so I would, try to get myself a snack or get myself a drink. And, my my family definitely got a little upset because they'd have to come home and pick up a mess on varying occasions of me just, trying to get something out of the cabinets and ended up spilling all over the place. And, for me, living with a spinal cord injury, I really felt like I could get used to not walking, but I couldn't get used to relying on someone else to do everything for me. And so when I finished rehabilitation and my doctors and therapists and the insurance company, most importantly, said, for someone with your condition, we feel like you've made all the improvements that you will, and, have a nice life. That didn't sit well with me. And I really just felt like if I could restore a little bit of hand function, that would improve my quality of life and my independence to where I would be able to do so much more for myself. And so that led me to look into clinical trials as a way to participate in more therapy or research to improve my quality of life. And I was really lucky in the sense that I found one that was in my hometown. So at that point, I was back to taking some college classes, had a really flexible schedule. It was close by, and it allowed me to participate in this trial that was something that, was going to be a big commitment, but it was still something that, I was unsure of. So the trial in particular was looking at restoring hand movement for individuals with spinal cord injury and quadriplegia. And like I said earlier, that was my bottleneck. And so I felt like that was something that, was perfect for me. It was, the perfect storm for me to have my spinal cord injury exactly how it was. But it was also the perfect storm for me to be living in the right place at the right time and find this trial. And so the trial involved implanting a device on the motor cortex of my brain that is responsible for the hand movement. And that device was a BlackRock Neurotech Utah array that essentially acts as a grid of microphones that can understand the language that the brain speaks. So when I would think about moving my hand, the computer could detect it. And then it would send that signal to another device hooked up to the computer that was a muscle stimulation system that would actually shock the muscles on my forearm to make my hand and fingers move. And so I remember going in for one of the pre-trial screenings, and at that point, they were just connecting the stimulation system to my forearm to see if it could move. And so I was laying my hand down, and they had it connected, and they were able to push some voltage into my muscles, and I could see my hand move at that time. And it wasn't perfect. It wasn't anything, super exciting to most people, but to me, that was, 4.5 years of me never thinking my hand was going to move again, and I could see it move. And that was really all I needed to know. Now, my family, I had to convince otherwise. Voluntary brain surgery is not something that many people have. And just to be like, oh yeah, next Tuesday I'm having surgery on my brain. With no direct, promise of benefit for me. This was something that I was only going to be able to use while I was in the lab. It was something that, wouldn't be permanent. It would just be really this proof of concept to see if this would work, and that hopefully more people would be able to benefit from it in the future. But that was another thing that set me at ease, that even if this was a failure for me, that the scientific community would learn a lot about that, and that would help other people going forward. And if it was a success, that's great. That means it works, and that means that this can then get translated into something that can be used in the real world and be something that, hopefully I can benefit from. So, my mom in particular, it was really tough because she had, stopped her life when my injury happened and moved into the hospital with me and, was taking care of me. And, now I was telling her that, even with all the progress I had made in the last 4 years, I was ready to risk it all for something that may or may not work. And so, took a little bit of convincing, but I was able to explain to them that the team that I was working with was, extremely knowledgeable, and I really felt like we were going to have success. And, success to me would have just been being able to open and close my hand and do it in the lab and make that be a, great discovery that can push science forward. But it turned into even more than that. And so we first started with just being able to open and close my hand. And that was still a strange sensation as well, because when someone asks you to open and close your hand, you just do it. You don't think about it. As an infant, you kind of see how your body responds and you learn that way. But, by the time you're, a young adult, you don't have any memory of what it's like to actually control the muscles in your hand to make your hand move. So I remember sitting there with the researcher's arm next to mine, and they would be cycling through it open and close with their arm, and I was supposed to envision that I was controlling their arm to get a little bit of, pseudo feedback. And that kind of worked. I don't know. I think I was thinking about it the right way, but no one knew. And then came the time where we hooked the system up all together of me actually thinking about moving my hand. I would be cued on the computer screen when to start and when to stop. And then that would be sent to the muscle stimulation system. And then that time when I first was able to think about opening my hand and see my hand open, I remember looking back at the researchers behind me and saying, okay, this works. Now you guys really need to get to work, because this is something I need to be able to take home with me. I need to be able to use. Everyone needs to have access to this type of technology. And so what was supposed to be a 12 to 18 month trial ended up being something that lasted 7.5 years. And because we were just so successful, and, that was a journey in and of itself, because, we had that roadmap for the first 12 to 18 months. But after that, we were, building the plane as we were flying it. And, we were able to do some really fun experiments of, started with just opening and closing my hand or moving individual fingers. But then, we had one of the researchers was cleaning out their garage and saw a Guitar Hero controller and was like, oh, that would work. And it could show how the system worked to do individual finger movement and how quickly it responded. And, brought that idea up next time I was in the lab, and I was all for it, because up until that point I was moving blocks around and doing all these kind of occupational therapy tasks that translate into real life, but they're not things that I would just be doing if I was sitting at home. And so when we were able to play Guitar Hero, it was fantastic, because it really showed that I could do the individual finger movements, and the system worked quickly enough that it, I felt like I was really controlling my hand. It wasn't, think about opening my hand or think about moving a finger and then count 1, 2, 3, and then the hand opens. It was almost instant. And now I was never going to be able to, play the piano or type on a keyboard, but it did allow me to play Guitar Hero, reach out, grab a cup, take a drink out of it, move things around in space. And to me, that meant it would be a lot of independence if I could use that at home. Now, 7.5 years later, after the implant, we were starting to lose steam with the research, where, kind of running out of ideas of what to do, but also running out of funding. And we had applied for some different grants and things like that, but we had really kind of run the gamut of its course. And that meant it was time for the device to be removed. And, I knew that this was something that would come at some point, and I tried to compartmentalize it in the sense that, when I went into the lab, I was kind of Ian 2.0 with being able to move my hand again, But then when I left and got disconnected from all the equipment, I was really just back to where I was before I, signed up for the trial. And I think that was helpful because I didn't let it, take up my whole identity. But I was wrong. It really did take up my whole identity and drove me into, a whole new field of what I wanted to do. And, while the time came for me to have the device removed, it was such a challenge because now I didn't even have that opportunity to go back into the lab and be connected to the computer system. But what it did was give me a lot of hope for the future and a lot of hope that these types of devices are going to be able to impact and help people and improve their quality of life. Other people living with spinal cord injuries, different forms of paralysis, or other neurological conditions. And so that really led me into, doing what I do now for work, is getting individuals with paralysis or other lived experience involved in research from a perspective of not just being a participant, but a partner in the research, and making sure that these types of technologies are being developed in order to support those individuals. And so now it came back kind of full circle of where I started of, being told, you're never going to be able to do this. You're never going to be able to do that. And now it's not a 100% never. It's a, someday soon we'll be able to have this type of technology for you that will allow you to, not completely fix your life, but really give you a lot of independence back and restore a lot of quality of life. And so with that, it's, something where I'm so glad I was able to take that risk and have that voluntary brain surgery, and participate in this type of research, because it, has really defined my life from doing it. And I'm just so pleased to be able to then once again share that story with all of you here today. Thank you.
Wow, that was Ian. Not only did Ian's story show how incredibly valuable it can be to be a research participant, but I really do hope that someday soon he can get his device replaced and it's even better than what it was when he was in the trial. Anyway, to learn more about Ian, visit our website, storyclatter.org. Our website is just one way to connect with Storyclatter, but there are so many other ways, and we hope you'll use them all. You can always follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Head to storyclatter.org to become a financial supporter. If you're interested in coming to one of our shows, starting a Storyclatter show in your own community, or even learning how to tell your own science story, you can find everything you need on our website. This podcast is produced by me, Misha Gajewski, along with Jen Chen, Nikisha Roberts-Washington, and Aaron Barker, Executive Director and co-founder of the Storyclatter. The stories featured in today's episode were produced by Kelly Vinyl and Mesa Salida. Special thanks goes out to the Storyclatter's board and team. Also, an extra big special thanks to INNS at Georgia Tech, Medtronic, and BlackRock Neuro for sponsoring today's episode. Our theme music is by Ghost, and next week we'll be back with stories about gardening. They're delightful. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. If you love learning about the tactics, tricks, and tips that can help you upgrade your life, money, and travel, all while spending less and saving more, then I've got a podcast you should check out. It's called All the Hacks. It's hosted by Chris Hutchins, a financial optimizer who loves doing all the research so you don't have to, finding the best experiences in life without the expensive price tag. Every episode is packed with the kind of practical advice you didn't even know you needed, like which credit cards can help you travel the world for free, or how to tweak your daily routine to actually boost your happiness. And the guests, They're incredible. Chris talks with everyone from 3-time Olympic gold medalist Carrie Walsh-Jennings to relationship science expert Logan Yeary. One episode I really loved was with Dr. Robin Chutkan. It was all about understanding and improving your gut health, something I've been deeply curious about for a while, and I really appreciated how simply she broke down the science and the research behind digestion, immunity, and brain health. There's truly something for everyone, and I'm sure you'll walk away with at least one new tactic to apply to your own life. Search for all the hacks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Your wallet will thank you later.